Good morning, Baltimore and beyond. What a day it was. Our first winter snowstorm of the season. I guess to use that famous word nor'easter, which I don't quite to this day know what it means, but I do know it was nasty yesterday as the ice and the snow fell upon the earth. And it got a friendly reminder that we are indeed in December. December, what a noteworthy time in the life of Morgan College, a noteworthy time in the life of all the things that we're going through. And I see that there is a time and a place where Morgan College received an incredible addition, a dedication service that occurred on December 16th, 1941. I want you just to imagine that date. 1941 is the same time that Pearl Harbor had been invaded, December 7th. A little bit more than a week later, one of the most amazing dedications took place in the academic community. That is the dedication of the Christian Center at Morgan College, a center that had been divinely thought through with things that were going on around the country, how people began to look at the way in which America was beginning to understand the centrality of Black education, to develop leaders at Morgan College under the leadership of an architect who I think we all were amazed to see happen, develops this center called the Christian Center. It's in December 16th, yesterday, in 1941. We thought today would be a great opportunity to look back then and to begin to discuss and discern the issues that were relevant to the creation of this building. What was its purpose? What kind of missional things were fulfilled in it? And where do we go from now? What have we done moving forward? As I look at those 9 goals, I see a refreshing similarity to things we've still committed ourselves to do over the years, that it really has made it so important to do. We thought, as always, we would ask our assistant archivist at the university and a member of the Friends of the Chapel, a Morgan man through and through, BA, master's, PhD, and just someone who really is thoroughly committed to looking at the issues about Morgan College and its impact on the world, none other than Dr. Edwin T. Johnson. Dr. Johnson, you just lead us off in our discussion. We can begin transferring ourselves back to December 16th, 1941. Some of us are not born yet, but I'm sure there are a couple of us that were at least begin to be thought about. So we'll take it from there. My brother.
Thank you, Pastor Keels, Reverend Keels. I appreciate this opportunity to kind of share my thoughts. And I'm going to jump around a lot, but I know that all of you are intellectually astute and y'all can jump with me, but we're just kind of going to go back and forth through time. So it was 79 years ago on yesterday that the Morgan State College Christian Center was formally dedicated and came into being, if you will. But I would like to go back further. And again, I'm going to be jumping through time, so if you just bear with me. If you go back to 1864, which was actually November of 1864 is when people who were enslaved in Maryland were actually liberated. A lot of people don't know that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free those who were enslaved in states that did not secede from the Union. So the state of Maryland has one of those crazy histories, because even though we were a Southern state, we did not secede from the Union. So slavery continued on here an additional year after the Emancipation Proclamation. But that's a story for another day. But what I want to point to is that in that same year, a man named Libertus Van Bachlen was appointed the first state school superintendent in Maryland. Libertas Van Bocklen. There's actually a building. If you ever drive down York Road past Towson University, there's a building looks similar to Holmes Hall with a clock tower that's named in his honor. But when the question was posed to him, how as state superintendent do you feel about educating Negroes? And his response, and I'm paraphrasing, is that educated laborers are more efficient laborers. You get better work out of folks that are educated. So I want to really begin there. So from the standpoint of the state, and I'm going to end up in a conversation and leave you with the division of church and state. At the inception of public education in this state, at best, people of color were viewed as laborers, okay? So in the same breath, in the same mindset that Libertas Van Bocklen, the leader of state education, public state education in Maryland, had these thoughts, the Methodist Church saw fit to start putting together the seeds that would burst forth at some point and become Centenary Biblical Institute, Morgan College, and then Morgan State College. And I'm saying that to say that it is important to understand that when we look today at all of the problems we have between church and state, and Reverend Keels, that's a discussion for another day, as to how the name even changed from Christian Center to University Chapel. There's a larger discussion about how we try to remove God from everything. We take prayer out of schools. We got rid of baccalaureate services. Right now, our convocation programming, which has been around since the inception of Morgan, has been challenged and is waning. But there has been a systematic removal of God and any references and affiliations and associations with God and the church from public institutions to include Morgan State University. But the thing that I want to drive home is that we would not be here today as a state university. We got, I think, $40 million this week, and we're doing big things. Our classification has gone from Carnegie 2 to something else. State of Maryland's designated premier urban-oriented doctoral branding Carnegie 2 classified historically Black university. And we're doing all of these wonderful things, but in the beginning, God. And that's so very important. And again, I'm jumping around, but y'all can stay with me. 1896 was the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. And those of you who are constitutional scholars would say that 1896, which made separate but equal constitutional, was the law of the land until Brown versus the Board of Education decision, which overturned it. And the importance in bringing this up is that in the state of Maryland and anywhere else in the United States, if you separated public facilities by race, that was legal as long as you provided those facilities for both races. So yes, you could have a segregated library for white only as long as you provided a library for Black, swimming pool, whatever it is that you're providing. And I wanted to have this conversation because when you talk about higher education in the state of Maryland, the state of Maryland willfully ignored the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. So while there were public institutions of higher learning for Maryland's white citizens, the state of Maryland did not see fit to create any institutions of higher learning for its Black citizens. And the way they skirted this, and some of you may be old enough or you have parents that can remember what was called the out-of-state scholarship. And what would happen is that if you were a resident of color in Maryland and you wanted higher education in Maryland, you would go to the state would say, we don't have any integrated institutions, and they would give you a scholarship and send you up north to go to school. And that's why if you meet a lot of Morganites from like the 40s and 50s, a lot of those folks have degrees from places like NYU and Harvard and Columbia and all of those northern institutions, because the state of Maryland would actually pay for its colored citizens to go up north, but they did not want you to go to school here in the state. So it was the Methodist Church that saw fit to provide the first opportunity for people of color to receive a liberal arts degree. And I'm specifying liberal arts degree because both Coppin and Bowie were doing teacher training and nursing, and those were acceptable careers. But for the most part, institutions for people of color were largely created, and you can even see it in the names. You don't have to believe me if you don't trust my research. You see a lot of A&Ms, a lot of A&Ts, a lot of A&Is, agricultural and technical, agricultural mechanical, agricultural industrial, which was pretty much the Booker T. Washington model from Hampton to Tuskegee, where whether you want to look at it like that or not, and again, this goes to your critical thinking and your critical eye, most of the mainstream white America was okay as long as people of color were elaborating or increasing what they had already done as enslaved populations. So if you were accustomed to working in the field, I have no problem for you to get training in agriculture so that you could be a better worker in the field. If you were a mason and you laid bricks, I have no problem with you get education and training so you can be better at building. One of the fascinating things, if any of you ever have the opportunity to look at a graduation or something from Hampton or Tuskegee, you would actually see during graduation, they would have a group of students, and during the commencement ceremony, something is physically being built on the commencement stage. And it used to be really, really, really impressive. But my point is that the state government or the state mindset limited and pigeonholed people of color to being blue collar laborers and blue collar workers, but God, because it was the Methodist Church that saw fit to go from clerical training to education, teacher training, to the liberal arts. Now, the interesting thing is that if you look at the date of the founding, and I'm tired of all listening, I know I'm going a lot of places and I'm seeing a lot of pensive looks, but stay with me. So December 16th, 1941 is when the Christian Center, not the chapel, the Christian Center was dedicated. But if you go a couple years earlier, 1939, Morgan College, owned, operated by the Methodist Church, became Morgan State College. And for a lot of us, it's just like a little blip, 1939, Morgan State College. But there's a larger story. There was a gentleman named Donald Murray, born and raised Maryland. I believe he was born and raised in Baltimore, had a desire to go to law school, University of Maryland School of Law. And of course, he was denied. And he was presented with the opportunity that I talked about earlier, which was the out-of-state scholarship. So the state of Maryland said, here's some money, boy, go up north and get your degree. And he said, no, I shouldn't have to go up north. I'm born, raised here. I pay taxes here. My parents pay taxes here. I have a right as a citizen of this state to have the opportunity to pursue my degree here in my home state of Maryland. I shouldn't have to take the scholarship and go north. And there was a gentleman who would become a household name, but his career was just getting off to a good start, named Thurgood Marshall. And he happily took the case. So Donald Murray sued the University of Maryland, the University of Maryland School of Law. Now, there's another story to that I won't have time to get into, but Thurgood Marshall happily took the case because a few years earlier, Thurgood Marshall also wanted to go to the University of Maryland School of Law, and he was denied. And that's how he ended up at Howard University School of Law under Charles Hamilton Houston. But to come forward, so Donald Murray took the University of Maryland system, it wasn't a system yet, I'm sorry, University of Maryland School of Law to court And remember, this is 1935, right? Plessy versus Ferguson was 1896. 1896 to 1935, Donald Murray takes School of Law, University of Maryland School of Law to court, Thurgood Marshall, NAACP Defense Fund, and they're victorious. And they find out after all of these years that yes, the state of Maryland has not been honoring Plessy versus Ferguson. So out of that comes the Commission on the Higher Education of the Negro, where the state government then begins to look at higher education opportunities across the state of Maryland for its citizens of color. And they found out after all of these years since 1896 that they have in fact failed to provide higher education opportunities beyond nursing, teaching, and agriculture. Now there's a larger story about UMES, but I don't have time to get into that. But my point is, after the higher education of the Negro, the state was encouraged, air quotes, to right the wrong that had been in place since Plessy versus Ferguson. And they found out, Reverend Keels, that it would cost a whole lot of money to create an institution of higher learning for people of color to pursue a liberal arts degree from scratch. But as they surveyed the landscape, they found that there was a Morgan College that had been educating people of color in the liberal arts since 1890. They had a conversation with the Methodist Church. And after that conversation, Morgan College, owned and operated by the Methodist Church, was acquired. My air quotes are for acquired Morgan College. And for the sum of somewhere in the neighborhood of $175,000, I may be wrong, Reverend Hauser had to correct me. It's either $175,000 or $275,000. Morgan College, owned and operated by the Methodist Church, became Morgan State College, owned and operated by the Maryland state government, Maryland State Department of Education, and all those appertaining, blah, 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 blah. What's my point? My point is that the state government didn't do what it was supposed to do. But God saw fit through the Methodist Church to do what wasn't being done. But the unfortunate thing was, it was a positive and a negative. The Methodist Church did it so well that when it came time for the state government's feet to be pressed to the fire through this court case, they couldn't outdo what was already being done. So it made more sense to just take over. So by taking over Morgan College and Morgan becoming a state college, then the process begins to separate church from state. So while we look at the dedication and everything that was happening, and that was a good intro that you gave about World War II and the Double V campaign, victory in Europe, as well as victory over discrimination and racism here on American soil. But it's important to remember all of the other things that were going on that were legal here in the state of Maryland. It was legal for us to be denied the opportunity to earn a liberal arts degree. And I could get into a whole nother conversation about the importance of a liberal arts degree amongst people of color, but there's not enough time for that. But my point is that in all of the things that are going to come following this introduction, what I want to drive home is that the Christian Center is the last remaining remnant of Morgan's birth. It's the last remaining remnant, because in 1939, when Morgan College left the Methodist Church, left God's purview and overview and authority, and went into the hands of the state that already demonstrated that they had no desire to serve the people that this institution served, the process of removing God and removing the church from the institution, that's when it began. So it's not by accident that Morgan becomes a state college in 1939 and that this Christian Center is being dedicated in 1941, because the Christian Center is the last bastion. It's the remnant of the beginning. So there have been countless battles, and there's a story for another day about what happened to the parsonage, where so many of those men of God who were responsible for so many things resided here on campus. But when you look at the spiritual soul of this institution, the Christian Center is it. And while everything else was removed, the Christian Center, or whatever you want to call it today, because I know the name will change again because of the state, but it is the last remnant of our beginning. And it looks like you're ready to talk, Pastor Keel. I guess I'm running out of time.
No, you continue. I think that I was just affirming the fact that very few people can make that connection between the remnants of the Christian Center being the tie to what happened in 1867. And in fact, 1939 becomes even more important too, because it becomes the year of reconciliation within the Methodist Episcopal Church. Prior to the state, the church giving the property to the state, the church decided they would try to wrestle with its own issues of racism. And one of the last remaining issues it had was, in fact, the Morgan College reality. And in essence, what had happened was, in 1939 in St. Louis, Missouri, there was a plan of union for the Methodist Episcopal Church to try to breach the gap of the Civil War of 1861 to 1865. What they did was really egregious. They created jurisdictional conferences, four of which were geographical for Methodist Episcopal people. All of the African Americans were placed in the central jurisdiction. And so what you have is that the Christian Center becomes not only the remnant, but it becomes a conscious soul of the development of the spiritual and moral character of students. That was never emphasized before in a lot of the Booker T. Washington models, which I thought was very brilliant on your part to talk about A&M, Alabama A&M, and a normal college and stuff. It really was so clear that the liberal arts education defines what it means to have a soul, and defines what it means to take that soul into the sphere of leadership development, of branching out into other things other than becoming a better farmer or becoming a better agricultural person, to actually begin to really think and to begin to develop theoretical analysis of the fields within law, et cetera, et cetera. So by all means going, I was just affirming that this dedication was more than just a dedication of a building. It was a statement of affirmation of where we had come from, and the fact that we were still committed to do that. And the genius of it all in December 16th was that it was still not an organic part of the state university system. So it has some independence to operate on those 9 values, which we all have seen over the years. So that's what I was trying to allude to.
It sounds like I left off with the perfect segue. Take it on.
Okay, where I think folk need to be able to understand is, each of you look at where you are, particularly those of you who are Morgan alum, and ask yourself 2 fundamental questions. What was unique about Morgan experience in terms of the Christian Center having a prima facie role in the development of your understanding of spirituality and your understanding of moral values? Very, very seldom do colleges in that era begin to talk about that. But given the climate of America, a lot of the things that are birthed in the civil rights movement come through the nurturing and the development of the programs that are happening in the Christian Center. To me, when I hear, Art and Warren talk about the fact that a lot of the the social activities that were gathered, a lot of the think tank groups that were there. When I hear Neva talk about her experiences of being able to understand social development, this Christian Center was the student center in the purest sense of the word. Not only the development of the spiritual, but the temporal needs of students as well. And what Albert Irvin Cassell was able to do was to create a model, not only that's at Morgan, but is replicated at a lot of HBCUs around the country, but a model I said now that is in a creative tension as to its survivability. How will it be seen? Will people be able to struggle with the fact that it's okay to name spirituality and faith development without talking about religion? It's okay to talk about interfaith development. It's okay to talk about that everyone comes to the table, students, faculty, staff, with some sense of their lifelong mission. What you learned at Morgan, in many ways, served as a catalyst for what you've become in your life. Let's think about, I want you all to respond to that. What you chose to do going through Morgan, how has that shaped what you're doing now? How did you bring that to the federal government, Warren? You know, how did you bring that, Ken, through the sense of the need for counseling? That was something that we never really even understood, the need to deal with the issues of counseling within the African-American experience, because it was never even thought of. My wife showed me a book yesterday, and I forget who the Reverend wrote it, but it's called The History of the Black Man. And the book is 37 pages long. And I read it last time, you know, that it is interesting that without a liberal arts education, we don't even begin to think about those things that are affecting issues that we still are wrestling with today. So any response?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned counseling, because it's very important. And where we are with the counseling center now is wellness. Okay, so wellness is the healthy balance of mind, body, and spirit. When I first entered the counseling field back in the 70s, our training was shy about spirituality and religion. So personally, I have evolved to talk about counseling. And as I counsel students, I interject spirituality. Sometimes I do it without saying it. Other times I'll tell the student, I'm going to take off my counseling hat and we're going to talk spirit. Spirit in terms of person to person, man to man, man to woman. And they gravitate towards that. They begin to feel more at ease. They begin to feel as though what's going on here, counselor and counselee, is real. And they really get that. So I want to put that aside and go back to Morgan and his birth, because I've been on Morgan's campus for 41 years. Okay, I see Morgan landscape as sacred ground. Okay, Morgan has his roots in Christianity. Morgan has his roots in religion, and we continue to grow. So when students come to Morgan, not only are they planting seeds, we are giving them water. We are giving them earth such that they can continue, grow, sprout, and share it with others. And I tell my students all the time when I teach them, not only am I here to teach you, I'm here to learn from you. Because these people are gifted, talented, and they have a lot to say, and there's a lot on their minds, and they need an avenue where they can express themselves freely, where they can express themselves mentally, when they can express themselves physically, and most important, spiritually. So even when I teach, I give them that opportunity. When I walk across campus, sometimes I stare at the statue of Frederick Douglass. And then I look at the building, the Carnegie building. Come on now. History in its making. And we who walk this sacred ground, we are making history also. Right. This forum right here is history making. There's been nothing like it. So I'm glad that we have that. And students are very free to seek out counseling. And not only that, sometimes what we'll do is call them.
Yeah.
And say, how are you doing? We don't wait for them to always come to us. And they get a lot out of that. They see that we care and that it's making a difference. So I'm glad you mentioned counseling.
What I found, Ken, is when I talk with students about this marvelous history of spirituality, is they're somewhat surprised that Morgan came out of a religious experience, and they're surprised for two reasons. One, that very few people today intellectually connect historically with the Black church. And by that I mean, can you really trace the fact that anything that was happening that was progressive, it was about liberating, was about developing, began in the Black church. And one of the principles that the dedication of December 16th did was to maintain a sense of understanding and relationship with the Black church. In my course, Religion in the Black Church, one of the things I always try to remind them of, that this is not talking about just the building. It's talking about the collective consciousness of how, when you begin to have core values that have aspects of spirituality and moral development, you ensure a society doesn't run into the pitfalls we've run into the last 4 or 5 years. I've never seen more of a disease, if you will, among people who feel helpless in light of all the things that are going down, the conspiracy theories, the fact that people don't believe Black people trust this. Trust is not the issue, faith is the issue. And in the Christian Center in 1941, now you just got to, again, you got to picture what's happening in 1941, 2 years removed, as Dr. Johnson said, from 1939, when in fact it becomes Morgan State College, which really begins that it's the first time, and almost at the third waypoint of the 20th century, that someone is saying, let's separate this centenary biblical institute experience and I'll make it a state-connected thing. Well, in light of the fact of what Dr. Johnson did so excellently in the beginning, was that, can you imagine if you wanted to have a degree other than something in agricultural, you would get a scholarship to go somewhere else to do it? So in fact, it was illegal to develop the spirituality and the moral development of the Black person in Maryland. And to me, that's amazing. I think two more of our graduates in the 1950s, Donald Stewart and Ernest Brown, who become the first and third admittance to the University of Maryland Medical School. And the fact that this whole cadre of Black doctors, and you just sort of recently where the person that founded the Garvey Medical Center passed away, that they all got their energy, their growth through becoming part of the Christian Center. Dr. Brown was a lifelong Methodist. He was a person that had an incredible ability not only to be a surgeon in the Army, but to then be one of the stalwarts of the then Providence Hospital. So that I remember having conversations with him. I used to be his pastor back in the late 70s, having conversations with, he knew while he was at Morgan, the struggle would be to become a physician, but that somehow the issues and the support they got from Morgan and the Christian Center really gave them the community to defy the rejections and to say, yes, we are going to be able to go to University of Maryland Medical School. So both Donald Stewart, who is a Morgan grad, and Ernest Brown, who's a Morgan grad, become some of the cornerstones of the pillars of medicine in Baltimore in the 1950s. And I just feel especially proud that these 9 values we talked about and this building we talked about, the Christian Center, becomes a place where they hone in on those skills. And that's really, isn't it, Dr. Johnson, the value of a liberal arts education is to learn how to think that everything you know has not already been written. Some of what you know is yet to be discovered. I wonder if anybody else here can reflect on your time in college, or particularly at Morgan, and how that time did. Warren, go ahead.
I just wanted to back before I talk about my time. You know, I think it's very interesting historically too, when we talk about morality, that our founders themselves recognized this, because when Morgan was established, they gave praises to God for this institution, which is dedicated for our moral and intellectual elevation. You know, and that being said in 1866 is certainly powerful. That's why Morgan was established, for the moral and intellectual elevation. And that's powerful. And then I have some quotes here I'd just like to share, just take a minute, from the dedication program from the dedication ceremony in 1941, which speaks about this transition of Morgan from a religious institution into a state institution. It's not stated intentionally, but you'll see the underpinnings. Here's what was said by Reverend F.J. Handy of the Delaware Conference of the Methodist Church. Let me put my glasses on here. He says that the spirit of Morgan College is too significant to be forgotten. It found embodiment and continues to do so in the lives of men and women, living and dead, who have and still are making a glorious contribution to the noble art of living. The Morgan Christian Center, built upon this spiritual foundation, will seek to become a worthy successor, custodian, and preserver of these values of the past, and at the same time, in the spirit of these great forebears, seek to make such adjustments as to meet newer changing conditions in our contemporary life by its program of Christian education. Powerful. Now then, Dr. William Stewart Nelson, the Dean of the School of Religion at Howard University, had this to say, quote, "It is reassuring to know that though Morgan College is now under state auspices of the church, which formerly supported it, has seen fit to continue its religious influence here through so promising an institution as the Morgan Christian Center." And finally, a message from Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. "It is the delightful task indeed to greet the old Morgan College board on the completion of the magnificent Morgan Christian Center, which has evolved like magic into an architectural gem which not enhances the beauty of the physical, but not only enhances the physical beauty of its surroundings, but adds a center of religious inspiration, which will be of inestimable value to the growth and development of the college."
And that's what's go ahead, Warren.
That I just wanted to share those statements with you because I think that historically that just goes to show you how this involvement took place, and it was even recognized at that point that these were critical issues for the survival of the spiritual foundation on which this institution was established.
I think that there's a second reality that emerges from that, and I'd like to get your response to this. 1941, it's the victories in Europe, the victories in the Pacific, the liberation of the world, but also it is the opening of the issues that and going to ultimately reveal the weaknesses of America, the 1950s. There's a moral obligation coming out of the 1940s, beginning with the rights of GIs coming back from Europe. But in the 50s, all of a sudden, it's as if there needed to be a preparation, if you will, for creating and developing students, professors, and leaders who are going to be able to be the future goon squads of the 1960s and 70s, who are going to be the Marion Bascoms, who are going to be the people in Baltimore who raise critical questions about, are we really comfortable being isolated and being in a point of discomfort? If you remember at the rededication ceremony that we did in 97, I mean, in 2017, I was really curious to look at the reaction of some of the neighborhood groups and the truth telling that comes out in terms of what they were doing to try to prohibit Morgan from really exercising its legitimate growth. It was not to the advantage of Baltimore to have leaders developed at Morgan because it would change the landscape of the city. And here you go in 1941, looking forward to 1961 and 71, and the gargantuan battles that were going to be on the horizon, and that those battles would not be fought with knives and guns, will be fought in the classic idiom of nonviolent resolution. It is, if you will, a precursor to Dr. King. The many development that happens Sunday after Sunday and day after day, art produces those kind of people that walk courageously into the 1960s and the 1970s. I was in this interview yesterday with the writer from Christianity Today. I was saying that it is so amazing that lost in the story is the fact that the Christian Center becomes a primary meeting place for the development and the coalescing of ideas. And it's almost like if you could use the term, the image of a spiritual pep rally. You know, it wasn't about a football game, but it was about life. It was about development of opportunities in the city of Baltimore. It was about developing courageous leaders, women and men who were willing to put everything on the line to know that they were duty bound to give back. It wasn't you just got your degree and you moved out somewhere and got rich and just, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps. It was that now that I have my degree, now what? Now that I know about medicine, what do I do to make medicine important? So when I came to Baltimore in 1979, I was able to see clearly the impact Morgan had on the city of Baltimore, for instance, with all of his graduates who were making incredible strides. The Roland Smoots of the world, Dr. Smoot, you can go on down the line of people who came through Morgan, who really were holding up the bloodstained banner, as it were. And that to me is very, very, very important. What are your memories, Morganites? I'm seeing a few of y'all on the screen this morning, of how Morgan changed your ministry in terms of maybe one, leading you to the kind of ministry that you're doing, and two, looking at those values. If Mr. Lockett would put up on the screen the 9 values, I would like to just get some reflection from those you all here in terms of what you personally have understood or received from that. And you can go in any order. Can everybody see those?
Mm-hmm.
The first, to assist students in their spiritual and moral development.
Dr. Kills.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to, before I address the list here, I want to just share a story. I don't know if I shared it with you about how Morgan and the Christian Center back at that time just had a tremendous impact on me and really changed my faith direction. I came to Morgan in August of 1970, and we had come up for football practice, and it's just the football players on campus. There's no one else other than the football players and the coaches and a few professors. And after one of the meetings, after we had dinner, we had one of the meetings, I was sort of walking across the campus, and just exploring the campus, and I walked by the Christian Center. And this was maybe 2 weeks into it. And by that time, the band members had come and some of the cheerleaders, but sort of walking across campus. And I heard this sound coming out of the basement of the Christian Center. And so I sort of, being nosy, I walked in, and there were maybe about 15 or 20 people in the basement of the Christian Center and the piano. And they were all gathered around this piano and they were singing. And I love music. And this music was so moving and so just inspiring to me. And I had never heard it before. And being raised in the Catholic Church, we didn't have that kind of music. Being raised in the Catholic Church, it was all in Latin back then. So, you know, you didn't really understand it unless you had the interpretation next to you. And saying all that, my grandfather was a Baptist minister, but my mother wanted to raise us in the Catholic Church because she thought she wanted to send us to Catholic schools, and she thought we had to be Catholics in order to go to Catholic schools. So, but hearing this music, I stepped in, and everybody there, and people who were coming in after I came, knew the music. Everybody started singing, and everybody knew the songs and the words, and I felt left out because I had never heard that kind of music before. I had never heard the sort of hymns and the spirituality that they were singing with. And I sat there in utter amazement. I felt embarrassed that I didn't know the words and I couldn't join in. And sort of that was the beginning of my spiritual growth. So I have to thank my venture across that campus for my spiritual development, because at that point in time, I didn't even have a Bible. Because when you're in Catholic schools, you have this, what they call the catechism. And that only deals with the New Testament. There's nothing much in the catechism about the Old Testament. So when folks were singing and testifying and all that, I had no idea what they were doing. The songs were beautiful, but the other part of it just didn't register with me. So at that point, I decided to go out and buy myself a Bible, and so that I could start reading. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to avail myself to learn these songs and to see if I could get caught up in the same sort of spirit and feeling that was being expressed in the basement of the Christian Center. And it just changed me totally. I stopped going to the Catholic Church. You know, I stopped going to the Catholic Church, and I started going to church with my father, who was a Baptist. And I started going to church with other friends who were other denominations, but they weren't Catholic. And it was the beginning of my spiritual growth. And that will always be something I will appreciate Morgan for. And the other thing about the chapel, and now the chapel, formerly the Christian Center, is that, as you said before, that was sort of the center of student activities. I remember when I got there, there were all these people who were meeting in the basement of the Christian Center, groups. And these were kids who were, I would call them really, really proactive groups, who were involved in all kinds of community-based things, you know, and so I went by there one time, and I met the fraternity that I ended up joining, Alum. They were in there, and these guys were talking about everybody having to be big brothers and everybody get involved in community activities. And they were used to bring children to the activities on Morgan's campus. They used to feed these kids, and they were involved in Parent Mitchell's campaign. And that really sparked something in me, because these brothers were doing something. They were doing things that were visible and active in the community. And I said to myself, well, I want to be a part of that. You know, I want to be a part of something where they're actually in the community doing things. And that was a result of me going past the Christian Center and going in and seeing sort of this activity going on. And so after those two kinds of eye-opening experiences to me, the Christian Center became sort of like a on-campus home to me. I used to go in there to study sometimes, because you could go in there to study. It was better than going to the library because nobody was in there, you know, during the day. So you could sit in there, you could read, you could study, you could do all kinds of things. And so I think that solidified where I am today as the Christian Center and the chapel being extremely
And it even
important
makes
to
it
them.
even more relevant, the fact that you were named by your peers as Alumni of the Year. You know,
Well,
you think about the transformative things that happened along that journey and all that you and Jackie, you know, have given to this university. I think it comes from a sense of not just what you get in the classroom, but the inspiration you get. And it's again, it's going back to what Dr. Johnson was saying. It's a very mild tension that we have to maintain that sense of spiritual development for lack for fear that they will lose identity. You know, nothing could be worse for people to wake up one morning and you know, how did I get to be where I am? And Neva, you're another person I think that's really shown the practical impact of your leadership, both in Zeta, but more importantly, what you've done in outreach at the chapel. What if you could just talk a little bit about, you know, your idea for Feed My Sheep and midday meditation, because that would have been really relevant in 1941. The fact that we, you know, very proudly um, worked with the Salvation Army to feed Baltimore's hungry. It's been going on quietly for 7 years, 8 years, beyond that.
Beyond that. But let me just go back to my time at Morgan, because my time at Morgan was a little bit different because I already had a family when I was at Morgan. But it was the relationships that I developed. And those relationships were through the quality of the instructors, the professors. And that spoke volumes in terms of what historical background meant, because those instructors took time. Let me mute myself a minute.
You know, I mute.
So,
There you go.
sorry about that. I had to unmute. I'm expecting a call. I have to have a stress test today. What I was about to say is that the relationships with the professors there at Morgan spoke to the quality of the university in itself as to who the instructors were, where they came from, their ideas. And I think I had a very unique relationship based on the fact that I was a little bit more mature than your average student entering college because I already had a family. So my time in the Christian Center was limited, but the Christian Center always stood for the symbolism of unity on Morgan's campus. And that was what was important, the unity, because my time was come to campus, go to class, make sure you did everything you needed to do and get back home to the family. But that was a place of unity. And when I talk about relationships, I think of Dr. Lucia Hawthorne, just to name one professor. And it hurt me to my heart to see that plaque that had been in the parsonage in a dedication to her, who was really very instrumental in a lot of what happened with individuals who were seeking a degree in education. And I can speak volumes of many others who I developed more of a relationship with. So Morgan always stood as a symbol of something different than any other university. And I kind of got to Morgan by default. And I'll say that because thinking about where I went to high school, there was not a lot of direction in saying, okay, you go to Morgan, you go here, you go there. It was like, well, go to Towson. But because of a relationship of a family member, I got to Morgan. So it's those relationships. And that's what's also important about the unity of what Morgan stands for in the community. So in my time being away from Morgan, I'm twice a Morgan grad, and it was by choice that I came back to Morgan to get my master's. And I was proud to come back to Morgan to get my master's. And I've been able to use the education that I earned and learned from Morgan to do the things that I was able to do in my career in corporate America. But after I retired, I wanted to give back to Morgan. And in giving back to Morgan, there came this opportunity to be a part of, at that time, the Christian Center, before it has now become the chapel. And that is now, what, 10, 12 years ago?
Oh, fair.
Right. And I wanted to give something to students that I have been given an opportunity to have. But I will tell you that a lot of what has evolved through Feed My Sheep, we started with a program through a club. Well, it grew out of a club because there had been an Episcopal Anglican club on Morgan campus well before I came. I forgot the exact name, but there was another organization on campus. But my coming back gave me the opportunity to work with Reverend Keels, who was just coming in at that time, to develop relationships in the community, knowing that our students needed to know how to reach out, and their spiritual and moral development was important and is still important. None of my background as an Episcopalian was for me to bring them into the Episcopal faith. That has never been my goal. My goal is more for the student as an individual to be spiritually well grounded and to have the understanding of what it means to be your brother's keeper, to be able to reach beyond what a church is, to be able to reach into the community. And that's why Feed My Sheep was important. And relationships, and I could name just a few students right off the top, and I won't name them, but it's a relationship with a student who's gone on after graduation, who reaches back to say, how are you doing? What's happening in your world, so that you can know what's happening in their world. So that spiritual and moral development is really important, and their leadership out in the world. So
Or the
that's what,
students that reach back and tell me of how you motivated them. I had a talk last week with a member of the Arizona Cardinals professional football team, who's a Morgan grad, who was saying that it's amazing now that he makes a lot of money, that he can actually begin to develop money to food banks in Arizona. And he said, who ever thought that for making sandwiches in the Christian Center and in the
right,
chapel, he'd be able to be in a position of providing $5,000 and $10,000 towards helping Arizonans, and that's what it's about. I know we're about out of time, but I wonder if we could do one thing as we conclude this discussion. There was a wonderful litany, Warren, that you sent to us. That was there. Do you have that before you somewhere? Litany of the rededication of the chapel.
Yes, I do. I think I do.
Okay, I wanted to see if you would read that. It just we would end with that litany. I don't have a printed copy in front of me, but those who have a printed copy, I know Dr. Johnson, you have a printed copy. I see one. If Warren would be the leader and you respond, Dr. Johnson, as the people. Y'all see what I'm talking about?
Is this from the program from 2017?
Yes.
can anybody share screen?
Can anybody share a screen?
I don't know how to do that.
And does Mr. Locker, do you have that litany? Because it would be nice if we could all share the screen to read that. I should have said that earlier.
While he's looking for that, I'd just like to say that, as Neva said, these 12 years working with the chapel have been great for me, and I've just found this still a continuing inspiration. Like Art Lawson, the chapel was my church home from 1963 until I graduated, and Reverend Cornish was my pastor.
Wow.
Yeah, and, he's looking for that literature, and I think about, all of those things that Art mentioned, the Goon Squad, which you mentioned, that met in the house, and there were Morgan faculty and ministers from all over the church. So I've often said that the chapel and the parsonage were civil rights historical landmarks in Baltimore, because so much of what has happened here in Maryland and in Baltimore, that leadership met and assembled, plotted and planned right through those two buildings. Of course, we were unfortunate to have lost the chapel.
How many of you have that litany before you? Raise your hand. Dr. Johnson has it. Can Warren serve as the leader and the rest of you all respond with the litany afterwards? Can we do that as a close? Can we begin now, Warren?
Yes.
I want you to listen to these words.
Dearly beloved, for as much as it pleased Almighty God to put into the hearts of his servants to build this house for his worship, let us now fulfill the godly purpose for which we are assembled, to rededicate the Morgan State University Memorial Chapel to the honor of God's most holy name, to the glory of God who has called us by his grace, to the honor of his Son who loved us and gave himself for us, to the praise of the Holy Spirit who illumines and sanctifies us. We
rededicate this house
for the purpose, for the worship of God in praise and prayer, for the preaching of the everlasting gospel, for the celebration of the holy sacraments,
we rededicate this house
for the comfort of all who mourn, for the strength of those who are tempted, for the light of those who seek the way,
we rededicate this house
for the hallowing of family life, for the teaching and guiding of the young,
We
rededicate
rededicate this house
for the conversion of sinners, for the promotion of righteousness, for the extension of the kingdom of God,
we
we rededicate
rededicate this
this
house
house
in loving memory of those who have gone from us, whose hearts and hands have served in this house, with gratitude for all whose faith and consecrated gifts made this house possible, in gratitude for the labors of all who love and serve this house, and with prayer for all who shall worship and who shall serve and support this house in years to come.
we
rededicate
rededicate this house
And now, as a people in the household of God, in the unity of faith, in the communion of saints, in love and goodwill to all, in gratitude for the gift of this house to be a habitation of God through the Spirit, we
we
rededicate ourselves
to
the
the
worship
worship of
of God
God
and
and
to
the service of
service of his kingdom
in
the
the
name of
ministry
the
of the
Father
Bible
and
and
Son
Son.
and the
and the
Holy
Holy
Spirit.
Spirit.
Amen.
Praise God.
December 16th, 1941, a date that we should always remember. Next year, celebrating 80 years of that date. We go forth and thank you again, Dr. Johnson, for reminding us of that creativeness that's going to exist. It says in the scripture, God always leaves a remnant. And I believe that the remnant in our community is spirituality. We cannot divorce ourselves from it, whether it's in counseling, whether it's in government or outreach, whether it's in how we deal in faculty. It is so encouraging to know that we have faculty members at Morgan who not only are very effective educators, but equally as effective chaplains in terms of the caring, and it does make a difference. You'll have people 30, 40 years from now, Dr. Holland, who will refer to the impact you made on their lives when they were 18 and 19-year-olds. That's going to be an important mission. And for the Black University, the Historically Black College University, I will never, ever, as long as I have an ounce of strength of my body, allow someone to take the spiritual development away from what we do as an offering to our community. It is sorely, sorely needed. Be strong, be well. See you next week. Well, next week we won't be on air because of the Christmas holiday. We will return a week from then, and some of the upcoming shows will be very, very insightful again to look at issues like the interfaith reality and having voices from the various monotheistic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam speak to the reason of their being part of the spiritual development and on campus. And have a blessed, safe holiday and pay it forward. Give somebody some light because you are the recipients of light. Amen.
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 Peace,
A
everybody.
women.
A women.
Merry
Got it.
Christmas,
Right.
everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I like that kid.
Yes.